party that came with him, and he's floor is yours.
Okay. Well, just a warning here, you might get a blinding light there. So, yeah, we're here tonight, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We're pleased to be here tonight to present the results of our study of the Rushford's flood control system, which has been an effort that we've been working, URS has been working on with American Engineering Testing for over a year. We're going to introduce ourselves tonight, talk about, provide some background on levee and floodplain basics, you know, what the Rushford system consists of and the requirements it needs to meet. Talk about the work we've completed to date, our findings of our study. There are some corrective actions that are needed. We're going to go over the cost of those. Some of the implications on whether it meets the standards or not and how that affects the floodplain. Look at some funding options, talk about some funding options for correcting the problems, and then time at the end for questions and discussion. So I'm Art Kelmus. I'm a professional engineer and the project manager on that. I'm with URS Corporation. Next to me is Joe Bentler. He's a professional engineer and the geotechnical engineer on the project with American Engineering Testing, or AET. Also here tonight we have two individuals from the Corps of Engineers, Dana Warner and Rick Hauk. They were kind enough to join us tonight, as well as Pat Lynch with the DNR, who works in some of the funding issues with the DNR and state funds. There were no state representatives here. We at one time thought we were going to have one, and I'm not sure if there's any others that are involved in this. Okay. In terms of the levee and floodplain basics, the city's flood protection system consists of 3 levees. In the screen, the picture to the right, they're the yellow areas. There's a drainage system within each of those areas that drains the water out. What we call those as closures during a non-flooding situation. The north area and the west area is the large area kind of in the lower left. Each of those have pump stations that pump water out when the gates are closed, when the closures are closed during a flood. That removes the water from the interior part of the area, so there's no flooding in that due to the local runoff. Another part of the flood control system is the Rush Creek Channel. The area kind of through town there was channelized to provide more capacity as part of this system construction. Currently, this is what the city's flood insurance rate map or floodplain map looks like. This is a map that's published by FEMA. It generally shows the areas that are protected by the levee as being dry and no flood elevation. So the flooding is limited to the channel areas. So that's a map that was published in 1980 and is still effective as of today. In terms of the Rushford flooding history, there were several large floods in the 1950s and 60s. The flood protection system was completed by the Corps of Engineers in 1967. Since that time, the Corps has estimated that it's prevented about $5.3 million in flood damages. There was floods in 93, 2000, 2004, and 2008, and that's the estimated flood damages that were prevented due to each of those floods. So it has worked well, you know, historically over the years, and the city's also done a real good job of maintaining it. In terms of the August 2007 flood, this was an extreme event. You know, the rainfalls depths that were recorded in this area of the state were some of the highest ever recorded in the state. In terms of the flooding affected primarily Rush Creek. The flow in the creek from that flood was estimated to be about over 38,000 cubic feet per second. For comparison, what we called a 100-year flood, which basically the system is designed for that, the flow rate's about 18,000 CFS. So that the flooding you had, the discharge in the creek was over double what it was essentially designed for. And the levees would have needed to be several feet higher to contain the flood without overtopping. Following the flood, there were damages to the levee system, to some of the erosion areas. Those were repaired by the Corps. That project is substantially complete. I think there's a few doors and things that, a few punch list items that needed to be completed with that. But generally wrapped up repairing that flood damage. So why is there all of a sudden this focus on levees? And it's a FEMA focus, and I think the Corps has had some focus through its levee safety program as well. A lot of that comes out of the Hurricane Katrina levee failures, and there's been other failures, some in Missouri, some out in the Sacramento River Valley. It's in partially due to the aging of these levees. You know, this system is over 40 years old. There's others that are quite a bit older. In around 1999 or 2000, FEMA started what they call the map modernization program. And that effort was to take all these old maps that were over 20 years old and update them based on new information, based on better topography. And rather than have paper maps, this map modernization created digital maps that was much easier to locate houses on, and they could be overlain over air photos and were much more precise than the old paper maps. As part of that process, that map modernization process, FEMA has started to review those areas protected by levees. You know, after all the levee failures and the issues with levees came up, a lot of questions came up as to how do we map those areas protected by levees. So currently the City of Rushford's levees or flood protection system is called provisionally accredited by FEMA. And they received a letter in May of 2009. And basically what that means is that the maps that they're working on right now will label the areas protected by levees with this wording right here. This area is shown to be protected from the 1% chance annual, or 1% annual chance or greater flood by a levee system that has been provisionally accredited. Overtopping or failure of any levee system is possible. So that's the wording that will be on that. So what this means is that the city has until October 25th, 2011 to provide documentation to FEMA that its flood protection system and its levees meet the current FEMA standards. I got a slide out of more there, sorry. What those standards are, there's 8 criteria that FEMA requires that the levee must meet those standards. It must provide protection for the 1% annual chance, or what we call the 100-year flood. It must provide a freeboard protection. In other words, when we talk about freeboard, we're talking about the elevation difference between the top of the levee and what that 1% or 100-year flood level is. So that's kind of an additional factor of safety, takes into account some of the uncertainties. That level has to be 3 feet throughout town, and at bridges 100 feet upstream or downstream it has to be more, it has to be 4 feet. So that's the kind of the factor of safety, or the vertical distance, you know, between that flood level and the top of levee to meet the standard. It has to be demonstrated that the slopes are stable, both during dry conditions as well as during a flood. We have to look at seepage and under seepage. That's something that Joe will talk about a little later. We have to make sure that the settlement is taken into account, and in this particular situation, it's not that critical. If you get more into soft river deposits, that ends up being more of an issue. You have to look at interior drainage. In other words, when the river or the creek are flooding and you get rainfall, what happens to the water that falls within the levee? What provisions are there to drain that water? So that's another standard you have to meet. You have to have a plan for operating the closures or the floodgates and make sure that they're operational and that there's a maintenance plan. Also, the operation and maintenance plan has to be updated to make sure everything is current.